coming up on The World Today. A feat for China as it launches 3 astronauts into orbit to begin occupation of the country's new space station. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, admits the country is going through a food crisis, telling senior advisors, quote, "The food situation is now getting tense." Plus, humanitarian volunteers at internally displaced Syrians camp in Idlib. The food situation is worsening there as well. A warm welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia here in Lagos, Nigeria. It's a win for China today as they successfully launched 3 astronauts into orbit straight up to its new space station. The astronauts Ni Haixing, Liu Boming, and Tang Hongbo will be spending the next 3 months aboard the Tian module 380 kilometers above the Earth.
China has successfully launched the Shenzhou 12-manned spaceship today at 9:22 a.m. from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China. The spaceship sends 3 male astronauts, Ni Haixing, Li Bamen, and Tang Hongbo, into space for the first manned mission during the construction of China's space station. After entering orbit, the spaceship conducts a swift and automated docking with the in-orbit space station core module Tianhe, forming a complex with the core module and the cargo craft Tianzhou 2. All 3 astronauts aboard Shenzhou 12 will be stationed in the core module and remain in orbit for 3 months. It takes a highly skilled team to ensure everything goes to plan, and Li Henggan, a senior engineer in China's Yan Satellite Control Center, takes pride in his job of monitoring the operation of satellites and spacecrafts and saving them accurately if necessary. According to Li, China has about 300 satellites operating in the Earth's orbit, and their job is to monitor all of them around the clock. Shenzhou 12 is the 3rd of 11 missions, 4 of which will be crewed, needed to complete China's first fully fledged space station.
The correspondent with the VOA covering space news, Kane Firebaugh, joins us now on the program. Kane, glad you could join us today.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So tell us, how is this feat being viewed in circles familiar with space travel or space exploration in light of the recent rhetoric about Chinese activities by the G7 and NATO?
Well, there is a considerable amount of alarm, and that's really because just coming 3 weeks or so after the Chinese Space Agency landed a rover on Mars that's now exploring Mars, this is really the next phase of what is essentially a new space race between China, the United States, and Russia. And these are the 3 countries that have been able to successfully launch astronauts into orbit on their own. And I think that, even the new NASA administrator, former U.S. Senator Bill Nelson, who's also a former astronaut, he spoke before a House Appropriations Committee and said that the Chinese space program has aspirations to get to the moon, to put astronauts on the moon, to also put landers on the moon. And they also have aspirations that go beyond the moon, just like the United States does. And so there was this urgency in his request for appropriations for NASA to focus on funding, putting our own astronauts from the United States back on the moon with the goal of actually eventually reaching Mars.
Well, Kane, you did mention a new space race, and China has been pretty successful with space missions in recent times. So does it bother other parties interested in space exploration and travel as well?
Politically, perhaps it does prompt governments to sort of open their eyes and question where the priorities are with their own space programs. For academics and for those who are involved in the scientific community, a lot of them view this as a positive development. It's going to mean that there are more countries, more focus on space, which means that people who are trying to study the cosmos and understand the origins of life on other planets and whether or not we're alone and what exists out there beyond our own Earth, all of this is positive for them because it means it's going to push that movement forward. It's going to mean more people are trying to get out there and do more exploration. So I think it's a mixed signal. On one hand, there are some that are concerned that, these efforts to get into orbit and to do things in orbit around around Earth is going to wind up having some kind of military advantages. But the scientific community is definitely on board with this, and they're hoping that this ushers in not just a new space race, but a new phase of exploration of the cosmos.
Well, let's talk about the 3 astronauts a bit and what their task is. They'll be there for 3 months doing what exactly?
So their job is to set up China's new space station. There are already some segments of the space station that have been launched into orbit in previous missions. This is the first manned crew that's been sent from China in the last 5 years. But the job of these 3 astronauts is going to be focused on setting up China's first phase of their space station, which would be their entry into permanently manned permanently crewed and manned space stations orbiting Earth. It's going to be the first phase of several in which there will be other astronauts that will wind up supplanting those that are there now who will return to Earth. They're going to try to start having a permanently manned presence in orbit on this space station once all of these segments and all of the new technology that they're supposed to be introducing into the new capsules that they're putting into place up there are fully positioned and ready and turned on.
Well, it sounds like they have quite the challenge ahead of them, and we are wishing them all the best. Thanks again, Kane, and do stay safe.
Thanks for having us.
Hong Kong Secretary for Security John Lee says the dawn arrest of 5 executives from pro-democracy tabloid Apple Daily were in relation to a conspiracy where the suspects tried to use journalistic work to collude with foreign countries. The arrests were made earlier today with a warrant to seize journalistic materials for the first time in a blow to the paper's chief executive, Jimmy Lai. The warrant, which police said was aimed at gathering evidence for a case involving the national security law that Beijing imposed last year, raises further concerns about media freedoms in the Chinese-ruled city.
Man and 1 woman, and the age is 74 to 63. All of them are the directors of the company affiliates to the Apple Daily. For the offense is to collusion with the foreign countries and the external elements, endangers national securities. 至於案情嗰方面呢，就係其實我哋喺我哋嘅國安處嘅調查入邊呢，發覺呢，我哋一共呢就由2019年開始到現在呢，我哋發現到呢喺呢個蘋果日報入邊呢。
With presidential elections set to hold in Iran on Friday, June 18th, Iranians in the capital Tehran have been expressing mixed feelings about actually going out to vote. Many are considering a boycott of the polls due to economic hardship and frustration with the hardline rule. Judiciary Chief Ibrahim Raisi and moderate former central bank governor Nasser Hamati are the main contenders, after Hardline Guardian Council disqualified several prominent candidates from running and others quit. President Hassan Rouhani has been calling on Iranians to not let the shortcomings of an institution or a group keep them from voting, apparently referring to the Guardian Council. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has already urged people to turn out in large numbers, saying that would help avert foreign pressures on the Islamic Republic. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has formally acknowledged that his country is facing food shortages. Addressing a meeting of senior leaders, Mr. Kim said, quote, "The people's food situation is now getting tense." He said the agriculture sector has failed to meet its grain targets due to typhoons last year, which caused flooding. There are reports that the food prices have spiked, with NK News reporting that a kilogram of bananas costs $45 or about 32 euros. North Korea has closed its borders to contain the spread of COVID-19. Trade with China has plummeted as a result. North Korea does rely on China for food, fertilizer, and fuel. The much-anticipated summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin is finally over, but as the U.S. President said, the next 6 months would determine whether the summit was a success or not. Both leaders have left Geneva with their own thoughts about how the summit went. President Putin praised Joe Biden's professionalism, calling the U.S. president focused, understanding of what he wants to achieve, and reaching it very skillfully. President Biden said his Russian counterpart does not want another Cold War between them, describing the summit as professional rather than friendly, and that there will be further discussions between them. Both leaders held separate press conferences asking questions from inquisitive reporters on Wednesday. The VOA's Charles Maynes is in Moscow with reactions from the Russian side. Charles, great to see you.
Good to be with you.
So it's been 24 hours since the summit ended. Are we hearing President Putin's real thoughts now about how the summit really went?
Well, as you noted in your lead, today he was quite complimentary of President Biden. He said that he was an astute and shrewd negotiator. He called him professional, noting the fact that you had to be very attentive when working with him so as not to miss something. Now, this all might sound a bit like a backhanded compliment when he also said that Biden was not this caricature that was presented on right-wing media in the United States, usually by Republican-led right-wing media. This idea of kind of Biden is somehow doddering, old, and a little bit out of it. And the funny thing is, it's actually what Russian state media has been presenting him as well. In the contrast, of course, we've got Vladimir Putin punching back against the U.S. and handling these questions from international journalists. It's a well-honed argument he has. He's made it many times over the years. It's interesting here. I think the timing, though, is very much tied to the election season this fall. We've got the Duma elections here. That's really designed to kind of mobilize society and remind that Vladimir Putin sticks up for Russia in this international arena. On the whole, this summit has been presented as a triumph, not only for Russia, but for the world. And that plays to Russia's global ambitions as an indispensable power once again.
Well, this summit was devoid of drama. We could tell from the way both addressed questions during their press conferences that there was mutual respect, like two counterparts who had conversations over a number of issues. So how can we tell what this means for U.S.-Russia relations going forward?
Well, I think it benefited from low expectations, frankly. No one expected these two to become friends. They said that going into the outset. There were no big deals that were supposed to be announced. But it was supposed to kind of freeze existing hostilities and put them on a more predictable path. And it seems to have done that, at least. We know now that the ambassadors will be heading back to their posts, both in Washington and Moscow in the near soon. In fact, the Russian ambassador may be heading to Washington at the end of this week. We also know that some working groups are being formed to tackle serious issues like arm control with nuclear weapons. Also, it seems to put some guardrails on the idea of cyber attacks from either side. This was mentioned, of course, by President Putin and by Biden in their press conferences. But it's interesting to see them also, mention this Cold War-style communique, mentioning this idea that nuclear war can't be won and must never be fought. This is an echo of the previous Geneva summit between Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev back in 1985. And this plays, again, to this optics that Putin really enjoys of a Cold War-style summit with the respect that he thinks Russia deserves and that he can certainly parlay to an audience at home.
Well, when asked about Alexei Navalny, President Putin did refuse to mention his name, but said he knew he was supposed to return to face charges. President Biden said the U.S. would respond if Navalny died. How is that being received in Russia?
Well, Putin got his main talking point in, which is that Navalny is, in his view, a U.S.-backed stooge. This is something that he's made the case before. He also noted, frankly, that the U.S. he thinks is the worst offender on human rights, so he pushes back against this idea that Russia is in the midst of a crackdown on dissent. And it's pretty standard fare for Putin. I think a lot of the focus here, frankly, was on Putin's more dubious claim that Navalny knowingly left the country. As Navalny's wife, Yulia, pointed out in a post to Instagram, her husband was, in fact, in a coma from a poisoning attack at the time when he went to Germany for treatment initially. Also, it's interesting to see this accusation that was thrown out by Putin kind of offhandedly that Navalny's organization, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which was recently ruled an extremist organization, was preparing Molotov cocktails, violence on the streets. That's something that, in fact, wasn't presented in his court hearings that ruled this organization as an extremist organization. And in fact, today we heard from Navalny himself, who issued a statement from jail on his social media accounts saying essentially, what could you expect from a liar? So as much as, say, Joseph Biden and Vladimir Putin have cooled the temperature, certainly the animosity between Alexei Navalny and Vladimir Putin still remains.
All right. Well, Charles, thanks so much again for joining us today, and do stay safe.
Always happy to do it.
Food has become scarce for the millions of people living in northwest Syria, displaced from Syria's Hama province, now living in a camp in northern Idlib. Food items such as bread, rice, lentils, and other essentials are nearly scarce, and many fear for the near future if the food aid stops. Some in Idlib warn of looming price rises should basic items grow scarce as demand for staples like bread and rice increases and supply remains limited. Food prices in Syria have jumped by more than 200% in the last year alone, a March assessment by the WFP found. A study found that a record 12.4 million Syrians, more than 60% of the population, suffer from food insecurity and hunger, double the number of 2018. Scientists say the COVID-19 epidemic in England is growing, much of it now driven by younger people who are yet to be vaccinated. But the country's chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, says there will be several more surprises from COVID-19 over the next period. Here's the global update.
Britain has reported another 9,055 coronavirus cases in the last 24-hour period, the highest daily increase they've seen since February. Earlier in the week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a 4-week delay to the final step of England's roadmap out of COVID-19 restrictions until July 19, amid a surge in cases of the Delta variant. In France, citizens are feeling freedom as it lifts the mask-wearing requirement outdoors. Mask requirements at work and in businesses are still enforced. Meanwhile, Disneyland Paris theme park opened its doors to visitors today after a 7-month closure, but safety measures requiring all guests over the age of 6 to wear a mask and social distancing will be enforced.
Good afternoon. I'm here with Dr. Bloomfield to set out the process and time.
New Zealand will take up to the end of the year to inoculate all those eligible for COVID-19 vaccinations. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced details of the country's vaccine campaign as the government faces criticism for a slow rollout of vaccines.
I can confirm that we will be rolling out the vaccine for the general population using age cohorts. That means it will help us manage both demand and supply, and also that we'll be able to communicate nationally when we're ready to start vaccinating the next age band.
The Japanese Prime Minister has announced that authorities are lifting a state of emergency for Tokyo and 8 other places, just a month and a half ahead of the Tokyo Olympics. Tokyo residents are expressing concerns over the government's decision, as many remain wary that the Games will spread the coronavirus. And finally, Spain's recovery plan after the COVID-19 pandemic and transformation into a greener and more digitalized economy got European Commission approval on Wednesday, the second such green light in the 27-nation EU.
Indeed,
after
today
Portugal.
I'm very happy to announce that the European
As one of the main beneficiaries of a $908 billion EU recovery scheme, Spain will get billions in grants until 2026 in an effort to revive its tourism-dependent economy.
And here in Nigeria, the British government says as friends of the country, it is working to help Nigeria through some of the challenges it faces in terms of security, economy, and as it approaches its election in 2023. Speaking to Channels Television today in Lagos, Deputy British High Commissioner Ben Llewellyn-Jones said he believes the commitment of Nigerians in addressing their issues will provide a pathway to a better country. Mr. Llewellyn-Jones hopes Nigeria resolves the challenges with Twitter soon, and he also says the British government is working with Nigeria to produce an ambitious but realistic nationally determined contribution, which is a document that details how Nigeria intends to reduce its carbon emissions.
As candid friends of Nigeria, it's important for us to speak positively but candidly at times. So, for example, in respect of the current indefinite suspension of Twitter, we've been very clear in our position, and we hope to see that resolved as soon as possible. But in terms of security, what we can do to help to try and address some of those issues, and in terms of the economy, what we can do to try and grow Nigeria's economy and create jobs, we're very clear as well about our support and our practical assistance in that space. So, it's a busy time in Nigeria, when is it not? But we're here to be a candid friend and a supportive partner. We've been working and indeed supporting directly the nationally determined contribution drafter, if you like, coordinator. But alongside that, we've also been working to set up something called the Climate Finance Accelerator, which will help Nigeria to access climate finance and indeed to motivate more clearly with plans for how to spend. That's at the federal level. I think at a state level, at a national level, as you allude to, that's where the effects are felt. We've had programs working on climate smart agriculture for quite some time now, which look at indeed how in the agricultural space seeds and climate supply chains and so on can really make a difference to practical farmers on the ground and to their communities. And bear in mind that so many of those farmers are women as well, and it's often women and children who are still the most vulnerable, who are feeling those effects of climate change and less able, frankly, to be able to make plans to address that. What we're looking for, what I think everyone's looking for, is an ambitious nationally determined contribution, but a realistic one. What we want is something that can and will be implemented with the support of partners. So I think that will be the difference, perhaps, in terms of how people see this. It's going to be something still more implementable than last time. And I think as well it will be something that donors and others can say, right, this is how we can work with Nigeria to take action forward. I think it is really, really important that that document is produced and available by the 31st of July so it can contribute to the COP. And I think there's a really important deadline point here for all of us to reflect on. I think for Nigeria to have a voice, to have a say, and to be as vocal as we really think it should be at COP26, having that NDC produced by that 31st of July deadline is paramount.
A Swiss tea room has created a so-called peace cake to mark the historic Biden-Putin summit on Wednesday, inspired by U.S. and Russian culinary traditions. Scrawled on top in navy blue frosting are the words "piece of cake" next to flags and symbols from the two countries, a doll and samovar for Russia, and a Coca-Cola and cup marshmallows for the United States. Inside the cake is half honey flavored, according to the Russian tradition, and half red velvet, which is popular in the United States. Interestingly, the cake did sell out on Tuesday before the summit, and she had to make more.
The idea of the cake is to combine famous Russian honey cake and American red velvet cake.
And just in, Zambia's founding leader, Kenneth Kaunda, has died. He was aged 97. Kaunda was admitted to a military hospital in the capital, Lusaka, on Monday, suffering from pneumonia. His aides said he did not have COVID-19. In the 1950s, Kaunda was a key figure in what was then Northern Rhodesia independence movement from Britain. He became president following independence in 1964. He stepped down after losing multiple party elections in 1991. News about his death was given by his son, Kambarage, via Facebook. He had written on his wall, quote, "I am sad to inform we have lost Mzee. Let's pray for him." Current President Edgar Lungu says the country is mourning a true African icon. Well, may he rest in peace. That is all we have for the program today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.